Hi, and welcome to the first episode of the show. I'm honored to have on as my initial guest my dear friend Lance Berkman. Lance doesn't require much introduction, especially for Houstonians, but I can tell you how we met first of all. So, welcome, Lance.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thanks for being here. Lance and I have known each other now since about 2010. I should probably reintroduce myself. I'm not sure he remembers me, but we spent some time together way back when Lance's career was sort of in a maybe a transitional stage. He was leaving the Houston Astros, had went to the New York Yankees, and maybe it didn't have his best season, encountered some injuries, and that's about the time that we met, and it kind of went from there. But so excited to have you on today, and looking forward to the conversation. And let's first start off by talking a little bit about your career. What is it, in retirement now that you maybe miss most about having played?
Well, I always say the paychecks because that's, for sure. And I wish I'd have played about 10 years later because these guys are really making some good money now. But no, it's if I had to point to one thing, it would be the camaraderie that you have, the relationships that you develop
Sure.
with guys on the team. And I think the you could go deeper than that if you wanted to, but that's the main thing I miss. The other thing I think is just baseball or professional sports in general. I think there's no ambiguity. Like there's no wondering, did I have a good day? Did I accomplish a task? Like it's pretty black and white. So some of that you miss. Like I've probably missed that less as I've gotten older and gotten further away from the game. But at first, I remember that being a real struggle. Like, how do I know if I had a good day or not? Like, you wake up and what are you doing? Like when you're playing sports, it's like you either got two or three hits or you didn't. You
Right.
either won the game or you didn't. It's
Right.
very cut and dried as to kind of your accomplishment. So it takes a little bit to rewire the brain to recalibrate yourself.
Sure. So taking out the garbage, for instance.
Doesn't quite have the same, there's not 50,000 people waiting to see if you spill the garbage on the way to the garbage can out of the kitchen, you know what I mean? So
There's probably a person or two that's watching what you're
there,
letting
no,
out.
now they're definitely, the consequences are the same. Like
Sure.
you could get cut, and just,
Yeah.
you could get released
Sure.
if you mess it up. So the
It's pretty
pressure,
objective. Either you did it or
yeah,
you didn't, right?
right.
So,
But it's not quite the same.
right.
Yeah.
I get that. Going back to your career, obviously, we'll talk a little bit about kind of your statistical prowess and what a player you were, which I really enjoy that part. But what parks, baseball parks are one of my favorite things to kind of discuss, just the nuance of how these parks lay out and that sort of thing. What park, if any, did you enjoy playing in most? Obviously, Minute Maid has been you've taken more at bats there than any other park, but is there a particular park that was most fun for you to hit in and why?
Yeah, I mean, Minute Maid is a great place to hit. I think it's one of the best ballparks in all of the big leagues. Just I haven't been to a couple of the new ones, but I played in every one before. Some of the brand newer ones started to open, and I can tell you that Minute Maid is as good as it gets in terms of the environment. I mean, it's loud because of the roof being closed, and there's not a bad seat in the house, and it's just they got it right. I know they spent a lot of time studying different things, and I feel like they did a great job with that. So it's Minute Maid is right at the top of my list. But in terms of the visiting team stadiums, there were some that you would expect, like Cincinnati is one of the great hitters parks in all of baseball.
Like Great American
Great
Ballpark.
American, they call it Great American Small Park because
Ah,
there's not a part of it that's not easily reachable for a decent power hitter. So, loved hitting in Cincinnati. That would be one that you might expect. One that may not be as expected. I love hitting in San Diego. Like that was one of my favorite spots. Atlanta, of course, they have a new stadium. So at the old stadium that they had there, I liked ballparks where the big outfield spread the outfielders out. It looked like there was a lot of green grass. You
hmm
don't. The problem with some of the smaller, more cozy ballparks, if you will, the defense feels like it's right on top of you, and you get
Interesting.
into some of those bigger parks. And as a hitter, at least for me, it was like, man, there's all kind of green grass out
Space.
there, and it just gives you a better feeling. So,
Sure.
San Diego, Cincinnati, Arizona, Colorado, Dodger Stadium. There's a lot of those stadiums out west that I really enjoyed playing in. But Minute Maid's probably, if I had to pick one, it would be
Yeah.
Minute Maid.
That's
for
cool.
sure. Yeah.
And you're a player who, former player who appreciates the history of the game,
Mm-hmm.
which I really, respect. And I think a lot of the younger players maybe don't have as firm a grasp of what has come before them. Um, Fenway Park, Wrigley Field.
I hate Wrigley. I'm not
Really?
gonna lie to you. Yeah, if I know that people get nostalgic about Wrigley, but I've offered on more than one occasion to be the guy that pushes the button to blow that place up because I do not like it. Uh, it was. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors that, and again, I haven't played in 10 years, so they could have made some adjustments. But
Right.
especially early in my career, Wrigley can simultaneously be the coldest or the hottest place you've ever played.
Interesting.
Every time we go there, it seemed like the wind was blowing straight in, so you had to hit it. You couldn't get it out of there if you hit it 3 times. Just
Right.
and the infield grass was like they were growing lettuce in the infield. I mean, it was. Somebody said one time they had a little infielder, a little utility guy named Augie Ojeda, and they couldn't find him for a couple of days, and they said he was lost in the infield grass, like he had gotten lost in there. That's how tall it was. So, the locker room was built for about 10 people, normal sized people, and you had 25 guys trying to get dressed in there. It was just everything about that place is the worst. So yeah, I'm not a Wrigley Field guy. Fenway is charming in some ways, but again, the older ballparks are great, but they were built for a different size human than currently exists, and so it takes some of from a player's perspective. I can understand why the fans like it, but from a player's perspective, it takes some of the charm away when you're getting dressed in a phone booth.
Right. Speaking of Fenway, that legendary outfield wall.
Yeah.
Did you sign that, or is that something that players get an opportunity to sign?
I can't remember it. Now I'm getting to be old. I may have signed it, and that does ring a bell. Like you signed the
do
inside
remember
of it.
Fenway Park.
Do remember Fenway?
Okay.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the one with the great big wall out there in left field. Yeah, that's what they call it. Yeah, so for sure, the one thing I remember about Fenway is the top of that wall. I think that's where all the drunk people hang out, because when I was playing left field, and it doesn't seem like that would be really safe, because it's pretty tall.
Right.
And a combination of alcohol and height is usually not a good thing. And I remember, we were between it. They used to play like Fenway's known for like Sweet Caroline, playing that in the seventh inning stretch. Mm-hmm. But they also play that song that goes da na 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 da na 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 na. I don't know what it's called, but they would play that between innings, and about the sixth inning, this guy, I mean, he had to be 300 pounds, and he obviously had way too much to drink. And I'm playing left field, and he's like, "Hey, Berkman!" I'm like, oh gosh, First of all, I was worried. He's leaning way out over the, I thought he was going to fall.
I thought he might need help.
Yeah, and he's like, "Hey, Berkman!" I turn around and he goes, "Na na 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 na." No, 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 no. And he, starts singing this song to me.
Sure.
I didn't know what to do.
Right.
So I turned around and, paid attention to what was going on in the game. But that's, I don't have very many memories of Fenway, but I have a vivid memory of this guy, serenading me from the top of the Green Monster.
You were the audience.
I was the audience. He was the performer. And
Wow.
So
15 years playing, which in and of itself is a great feat, particularly in today's game. I just think you're going to see less and less of that going forward, because players become dispensable with the volume of young guys coming in that are pretty skilled at a younger age, probably. But talk a little bit about sort of the brutality of professional sports. I think from the football side, we assume it, because it's a contact game. You and I met at a time when your career was very much on the blink because of your injuries and orthopedic surgery. I think you had 2 knee surgeries the year that we met. In the year prior to us meeting, you had 2 procedures. How many surgeries have you had during the course of your career, and then since then?
Yeah, we were talking about this before we started filming. I think I had 9 surgeries while I was playing. I remember I had 8 knee surgeries, so 4 on each knee. Yeah. But that's the key. You got to keep it balanced. You got to hurt yourself on either side equally. I had a right shoulder surgery, and I had 4 knee surgeries. So what was that? 9? I mean, I'm sorry, 8 knee surgeries, 4 on each knee. So I had 9 while I was playing, and then since I retired, I've had both rotator cuffs done.
Yep.
I've had an elbow surgery, I've had another knee surgery. So what is that? Say 14 or 15?
Yeah.
Just call it 15. I'm
Sure.
sure I'm forgetting one in there. But basically, yeah. I mean, the baseball. People ask me sometimes about the difference between like football, basketball, and baseball, and there's debates about which is the more physical sport. Which obviously, I mean, football, you don't get more physical than that, and I would probably rank basketball second as far as just the contact. But what baseball offers as a hazard that the others don't is it's like death by a thousand cuts, and so
Sure.
you're playing every single day, so it's like your body never really has time to heal or recover. And they're part of one of my knee injuries happened because of me being just worn out from 162 games season and then the playoffs, and then when you're in a little bit of a compromised state, you get you open yourself up to a greater risk for injury. So that's really what happens in baseball. There's a ton of rotational things that go on, and your joints are having to accept all that force. You think about from a hitter's perspective or from a pitcher's perspective with a landing knee, or as a switch hitter, of course, I think maybe that's why I was having trouble with both knees, because it happens on both sides, but your front leg accepts a tremendous amount of force, and you just do that over and over and over and over and over again. And I would say probably as a major league hitter on an average day, you're taking about 200 to 300 swings a day by the time you get done with your, like your early work, your BP, the swings you take in the on deck circle. I mean, if you added up all of your rotations, it's probably around 200, I would say.
It's bordering on golf at
Yeah,
that point.
exactly. Like in the course of the day. And on top of that, you're running around, you're standing around, you're diving, sliding,
Right.
all of that. So, I mean, not to belabor the point, but baseball it doesn't have the contact that the other sports have necessarily, but it does have a lot of tearing, shearing, those kinds of forces that you're putting on your body on a daily basis.
Yeah, the highest speed motion and the highest volume of those high speed motions for sure.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear like the throwing motion is the fastest, the humeral internal rotation is the fastest movement in all of humankind. We can't create a faster movement with any joint. And
Right.
the pitchers are doing that,
All the time.
all the time. I mean,
Hmm.
probably to almost the level of throws that you talked about with swings,
Yeah. Yeah.
So the wear and tear is just an almost unavoidable aspect of it.
Well, and that's why I think, like, just not to get too far off topic, but I mean, I think that's one of the things, and I'm not, like, we're obviously big fans of each other. I'm a huge fan of what you do, and I tell people all the time, Ben's the best in the business because I think you have a greater appreciation than anybody I've ever been around with, hey, like, how can we get these guys as strong as possible, but in a way that doesn't continue to compromise their body that they go through in a regular season. So, that's one of the things when I've sent some people to you and they'll be like, oh, it doesn't feel like you're working out. And then all of a sudden at the end of it, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm exhausted. And I remember feeling that same way. Like, this is not the traditional way of approaching strength
Right.
training. And that was what was so hugely helpful for me at that point in my career that you referenced, where I've had knee surgery in 2010 in spring training, and really never got right the whole year. And at the end of the year, I knew I needed to do something different, and that's when we met. And of course, just the way that you train athletes, with the eye towards injury
Hmm.
prevention and rehab, that's all incorporated. But at the same time, getting more or the most out of guys from an explosive, and strength standpoint. I think what you do is really unique in that regard. And so if there's any injured athlete out there, or anybody that feels that they're not getting the most out of their program, I would highly recommend them look you up. But I can say from personal experience that, training that way is a much smarter way to train, given with what we've been talking about here, in light of the
Sure.
fact that the season is so physically demanding.
Sure. Yeah, and I think that's an important point to reference because there's developmental training and then there's longevity training, and I
Hmm.
think few athletes, particularly baseball players, have the luxury that you are offered by being so well established at year 12 of your career, guaranteed contract, where you're no longer having to try to do more. Your skill level is so refined by that point. If you feel good, you could go out in jeans and flip flops and hit probably. It's just
Hmm.
a matter of feeling good
Right.
on game day, physically. So there's kind of a tiered view of development, I think, and for younger kids, kids that are in these windows of of like neuroplasticity, where they're taking to whatever they get exposed to. It's very important that they work at high speeds and they incrementally build into like higher loads so that they can turn into, a big, strong athlete over time. But once that's established, it's a matter of like keeping it, and without threatening,
Yeah.
yourself with competitive stress. So, but I've always enjoyed the way you describe that. I think you really have an understanding of how it can transfer to the field, and there's a lot of now I think a lot more awareness, even 13 years later, industry wide. But I just appreciate your ability to kind of connect those dots for younger players. Speaking of injuries, your some of your first injuries occurred in college, right? So Lance went to Rice University, of course, and if I'm not mistaken, there was a story once about football of all things. I believe you may have injured yourself playing football.
Yeah, I mean, football has got me in trouble throughout my life, and actually, a couple of my worst injuries I've had have been a result of just like recreational football. It took me a while to kind of give that up, but when I was in college, the Rice is a little bit unique. There's no fraternities or sororities. They have the college system, is what they call it. So when you enroll, you get assigned to a certain college, and now I think they have like 9 or 10 of them. When I was there was like 7 or 8, and so I was a member at Will Rice College, and each college had its own intramural teams, and so um, you could play if you were, of course I couldn't play softball, but I could play intramural football because it wasn't the sport that I was there to play, on scholarship. So all of my friends that were just regular students at Rice, they would be like, "Oh, you got to be on the team." And so, anyway, I'd been playing for my college flag football team, intramurals, and playing baseball at the same time. And Coach Graham caught wind of the fact that I was out there playing flag football, and he called me into his office, and I happened to be dressed to go to a flag football game. Like I was, on my way to the game, and I stopped in his office, and he basically told me, stop playing flag football. I don't want to hear about you playing football anymore. And I said, okay, coach, no problem. Walked right out of his office, straight to the field, and promptly broke my collarbone, and got my feet cut out from under me, landed on my shoulder. It sounded like a gunshot, like in my ear,
Right.
and I knew that something bad had happened. I was like, oh gosh, what? At first, I thought I dislocated my shoulder, and I put my hand up like this, and I did my shoulder, and my shoulder felt fine, but I could feel the bones kind of like moving,
Sure.
and at that point, I knew that it was not good. So I don't know if I was more upset that I had been injured or that Coach Graham was going to find out. I mean, literally, it just told me to not play, and I
Right.
ran out there and played and got
Yes,
hurt.
sir.
So I called him after there's the thing that stinks about a collarbone injury is nothing they can do for it. I mean, they
Right.
just give you a sling and they're like, okay,
Right.
we'll see you in 6 weeks, and I thought, oh gosh. So I'm laying, I'm in a chair at our apartment, and back then there was no cell phones, but I had the handheld cordless phone, and I
Right.
called Coach Graham. I was like, hey coach, he's like, Berkman, I heard you got hurt. And I was like, yeah, you know, basically I disobeyed and I broke my collarbone. And he's like, you're playing in the first game, and hung up the phone. And because it was, it was like in November when I got hurt, and our first game was in February.
Right.
So I did play in the first game. I made it back.
And this is your going into your junior
Going into my
season?
sophomore year.
Sophomore year.
Yeah. So I
Okay.
hadn't quite established myself.
Right. But you were a critical piece.
Yeah,
I
it was
mean,
a big part of what they were doing over there. So anyway, I think my body was spurred on to faster healing from the fear that Coach Graham
I bet. Yeah, that's
put into me. But that was the first time really I gotten hurt seriously.
And then there was a second incident, right? I mean, also involving flag football. You don't have to elaborate, but also later in your career as a
Yeah,
pro,
like
right?
after the 2004, that was where, like I was tired. I had no business doing it. We had just been eliminated from the NLCS in 2004, and a buddy of mine
Right.
called me and said, "Hey, will you come quarterback our flag football team?" And I told him I would, so I showed up out there. And I think honestly, because my legs were tired, I
Right.
just,
Tore your ACL.
it tore my ACL,
Yeah.
and I became the highest paid defensive back in
Flag football
flag
history.
football league.
On the disabled list, no less.
Exactly.
Wow.
Uh-huh.
That's funny. Um, so coming off of that sort of conditioning, we talked about strength and how maybe it wasn't as big a part of your career up to a point, right? Because you were a natural athlete and it wasn't a big focus for you until you kind of got to a point where you needed answers, probably.
Well, I would say I would probably characterize it more because we had Gene Coleman, who
Sure.
was sort of a cutting edge guy back.
Yeah, he was my grad school advisor,
Yeah,
which we talked about. Yeah.
he was, like just like any movement, I guess there's a pioneering where you look back on it and it seems maybe a little bit more rudimentary. You mentioned over the last 13 years, even since you and I have been working together, the strides that have been made. And so, take it back even further than that. Gene was great as far as like making sure we were in good shape. And we did, I mean, we lifted weights and we did your normal kind of strength training
Sure.
things. I think that was a part of it, and becoming more of a part of it as baseball players. Going back to my dad, I remember when I was a kid, he didn't want me to lift weights because the prevailing theory in his day was that baseball players shouldn't lift weights because they'd get too tight, and you wouldn't be able to, you would get muscle bound and wouldn't be able to move. And so I was brought up sort of in that vein where it was all about like you hit the tire, you do different things like that, but lifting weights was a little bit taboo. And then as I got into my pro career, that you realize, okay, that's not exactly right. And of course, even at Rice, Coach Graham was a big believer in the Olympic lift, so we power cleaned and did all those kind of things. And I think that really and truly, I associate a huge jump in my power production when I started power cleaning. So I had the story behind that is I went to Hays, Kansas after my freshman year at Rice to play, and there was a catcher from Texas A&M named Will Shiflett, and he was like, it was one of those guys you'd meet, you instantly kind of hit it off with, and he's like, hey man, let's work out together. I was like, sure. I had no workout program, and their program was all power clean heavy. We had the straps and the whole I mean, it was like Hans and Franz in there, lifting. But it helped me tremendously because I got a lot stronger between my freshman and sophomore year. So I know this is long-winded, but I had been exposed to strength training and had been involved with it before we met, but I think the intelligence with which we went about like strengthening things was way, way more than I'd ever been exposed to.
But also it speaks to the kind of the developmental piece, earlier in a career. It's important that you be able to do power movements like that. Maybe clean might be arguably not the safest one, but there are ways that you have to generate speed against high level weights, earlier in a career. That might have broken you in 2011.
Yeah,
but it made you at another point.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting how.
Well, it was just it was an unintelligent approach. It was almost like benefit by accident. Like we were doing what we were probably something that was very good for us, but didn't know why. There was no plan or reasoning really behind it. Where that was when you and I met, that was the first time I'd ever heard of like phasing out. You have this phase where you're focused on general conditioning and you're kind of training to train, and then you have a strength phase where you're okay, you take what you've built as a platform and then you really start to try to get as much strength as possible. And then you get into the power phase where you're using your strength and your skill production, and then you go into as you get into the season, you go back into like a maintenance phase, or where you're just you're doing all your skill stuff and you're trying to maintain what you've achieved over the off season. So I'd never really done that before, and that was a very interesting and new concept for me. I use that with our guys, and when we're crafting our strength programs. So
that's so neat to see. And growing up, obviously being from the New Braunfels area in Central Texas, baseball is a big part of your upbringing, right? Your dad was a
psycho, yeah,
very nice man who helped you to get where you were going developmentally.
That's right.
And who would you say was your biggest influence from a development perspective? With
I mean, my dad by far. Like this guy threw his arm out throwing batting practice to me, and I give him credit for a lot of things, but probably the biggest thing for me was the work ethic piece. I mean, he would goad you, like when you're a kid, a lot of times you don't want to, you'd rather play video games or go to the pool or jack around than work. And he was able to motivate me to work at my craft. So, hit off the tee. He set up a net in our garage, and it was 50 swings left-handed, 50 swings right-handed every day. He hung a tire in our backyard, which is a great strength development thing for a young hitter.
Talk about that a little bit, please, maybe for parents or young, because it's such a maybe thought of as an antiquated tool.
It is. It's like Rocky IV, the Russians training with all the high tech stuff, and Rocky's out there pushing boulders around, but so the tire is the equivalent to that, and
Right.
so
And this is just a tire hanging
you
from a
just like
tree,
a
for
tire
instance.
swing. It's like
Right.
you put a tire. It could actually double as a tire swing. So if
Right.
you have a boy and a girl, make
Right.
the boy hit the tire and let the girl swing in the tire.
Could be a
So
good Christmas gift for a
could
family.
be, and it's
Yeah.
very. You can go get a free one from any discount tire.
True.
Depending on the size of your children, I would recommend, probably a good size for a pre-high school would be like a tire that you'd put on a Mazda Miata,
Gotcha.
something of that size.
Okay.
And then as they get older and stronger, you could advance that to more of like a four-door sedan kind
Because
of
the
tire.
Mazda Miata still exists.
That's right.
Right.
Well, maybe it doesn't, but if it did, you can Google it if you don't know
Yeah.
what that is, and you can see the
It's
size
not a big.
tire.
It's
It's
not a
not
very
very
big
big,
car.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's so basically all it is you just hang a tire from a tree, and
Right.
then you hit the tread. In other
Yeah.
words, you want the barrel to contact the part of the tire that would be on the road,
Right.
if that makes sense. So you're not hitting the side of the tire,
I
you're kind
see.
of hitting it end on, and you want to, you want to try to drive the barrel into the tire and through the
Through the
tire.
contact point.
Yeah, and a lot of times, I remember the first time my dad took me out there to hit the tire. He said, "All right, take a swing at the tire," and I hit it, and the barrel bounced back, and it hit the bill of my cap. Because I just wasn't ready for the
Right.
impact.
Right.
And a lot of times you'll see young hitters when I do it with guys, they'll hit the tire and the barrel will bounce off the top, like it'll hit and then kind of skim off the top.
Right.
And you want to try to avoid that. You want to hit the tread and keep that barrel on the tire and drive it through so that the tire will swing back and forth. And the good thing about that is it teaches coordination between the hips and the hands. It teaches the proper contact point. It teaches ground force recruitment, if you will, like, being able to be in a good position to deliver a blow with your
In
feet and
sequencing,
legs.
right? Like you talked
Yeah,
a lot about
the kinetic chain.
if the kinetic
Yeah,
chain is not connected,
that's right.
my ability to get through that contact point is going to be minimized. And if I can get
100%.
everything behind it and together,
Yep. Then you maximize your
it's
force delivery.
self-correcting,
Yeah.
right? The drill itself
Yeah,
will tell you.
and that's the thing. Like most kids will do it right. Like if you just give them the task and like let them do it, they will naturally their bodies will organize themselves and figure out the best way to get the barrel into that tire and then
Right.
to deliver the most forceful blow. And
Right.
that's one of the things I like about it is kind of a self teacher.
Right, which also reminds me about your approach with hitting, because I've been fortunate enough to watch you work with some of our Major League Baseball clients that are hitters over the years, and talk to them about kind of the simplicity of their approach. And I love watching you set a ball on a tee and tell someone to drive it to the back net and not touch the sidewalls.
Mm-hmm.
And if they can't do that,
Yeah, you just
they have no business
trying to do anything
seeing
else.
something in the air.
Yeah.
Right? And so I think that is what gets lost with a lot of this, like new age, these advanced tactics to drive a baseball at a certain angle and all these things. If they can't set 10 balls on a tee, hit 10 straight to the back net, where do you think that leaves them in terms of like repeatability and starting to see things that are moving in the air?
Yeah, I mean it's just the old crawl before you can walk philosophy. The faster the game goes, the more mechanics break down, and the more that hitters resort to their dysfunction. And so the slowest possible speed that the game can exist is off the tee, and that's why if you can't do it, if you can't crawl, then why would you be able to expect that you could, run fast? You can't. So you got to learn really from the ground up, I don't mean like from your legs up. I mean like the slowest possible speed that the game can move, and then as you get better at that, you can advance to front toss and then dead arm BP and then machine where it's coming a little bit harder, and then the whole goal is to try to create muscle memory so that when the game is at its fastest, when you do have to perform the movement in an unconscious way as quickly as you can, you've built enough myelin to where the body just does what it's supposed to do. And that a big part of that work for me was off the tee, and I'm a huge believer that the tee is the if you could give me just one training device. I mean, to me, the tee is essential to the development of a good, consistent swing.
And for our baseball, maybe not kinesiology viewers, Lance just referenced a substance called myelin, which is sort of a coating on nerves or neural pathways. When you're young and sort of malleable as a nervous system, you produce lots of myelin, which enables you to acquire skill.
Yeah.
So Lance, as a side note, maybe the only uh, hitter at your level that also has a kinesiology degree from Rice University.
Which the only
Which
thing I remember from it is the myelin part, but if you run that out there and they know you went to Rice, you don't have to worry about
so no
anything else.
follow-up questions, but
No, yeah, no, the way I like to think about it is, like the body's all about electricity. Like that's how you move. It's electrical impulses that travel in
sure,
your nervous system, and so, you know, can you put more electricity down a wire that's the size of like a telephone wire or the size of a cable that you see being
right,
stretched across the highway?
right,
Well, the bigger, thicker the cable, the more electricity and the faster it can move down the cable. So myelin is basically, think of it like making thicker cables that electrical impulses can travel down, and
exactly,
there are certain pathways that electricity travels, and that's how you move in certain patterns. So when
right,
you're trying to learn a movement pattern, i.e., my baseball swing or my delivery, there's a lot of talk of repeatability, which is a big part of being able to be consistent with your performance. You got to have a repeatable swing or a repeatable delivery. Well, the way you get that is by we call it the layman's term is muscle memory. Like you do something over and over and over again, and you get the muscle memory. But what the technical part of muscle memory is just you've strengthened and widened those pathways so that the impulses travel the same way every time, and that's the substance that widens those nerve pathways is myelin. So it's a
yes.
protein that binds, and we can get all into that. But that's the only thing I know about kinesiology, and you can run it out there, and it impresses people. So hopefully, the people that are watching this
So
podcast
be impressed because
benefit from
yeah,
that.
that's
Yeah.
right.
So
And the old adage, old dog, new tricks,
yeah,
is actually based on the idea that we don't produce myelin at high rates once we pass a certain age. Like
yeah.
skill acquisition, whether it's playing the piano, hitting a baseball, whatever it is, it starts to the point lends itself to at what age should, a hitter really start to explore lessons and kind of learn a proper pathway. And I think it has to happen
As early as
as early
possible.
as
Yeah,
possible.
and
Yeah,
I would say it's not about, and this is I think a mistake that a lot of parents make with young hitters. Let them swing. Like I would not take them to a lesson before they're about 12 years old.
interesting.
And but what I would do is I would make a if you are a psycho parent just like my dad
Sure.
was,
And there are lots
make
of them.
yeah, there's lots of them. There's lots of you out there. You may not think you are, but you are. I mean, you know who you are. If you want your kid to have a chance, like I wouldn't take him to a lesson, but I would just give them a bat and take them out in the backyard and start when they're 4 or 5 years old and make them hit wiffle balls. And then,
Yep.
when they get a little bit older, you advance to real base. Let them swing the way they want to swing
Sure.
until they get to be about 12, and that they will have, the it's funny because there's a guy that I've recently met who I think is excellent at hitting, a guy named Eugene Bleecker.
Yes.
We've talked about him with,
Tennessee.
yeah, from Tennessee. 108 Performance is the name of his company. But what he does when he looks at hitters is he says, "Hey, send me some video from as far back as you can get it. Like if you have video of your little league, which
Interesting.
my little league days are all on VHS tape.
Right.
There's like one floating around that my mom has. But
That'd be
nowadays
fun to see.
with video, people that these parents, they video
Yeah.
everything. So a lot of these kids have video from when they're 5 and 6 years old. And the funny thing is, you watch those kids when they're young, before they've had coaching, and their swings are better than after they've been exposed you know, to coaching. So the body will organize itself, and if kids have given a task, we'll kind of figure it out. And a lot of times, it's the most efficient way they can do it. So I'm a big believer in like not fooling with kids until they're about 10 or 12 years old. Just letting them hit, but exposing them to a volume of swings. Like make
Sure.
them hit if you want them to be a hitter. And that,
Sure.
I know one of the things that we talked about before we started was like this notion of, does playing other sports help? And the answer is no. Like, you're not going to get better at baseball by playing football, and you're not going to get better at tennis by playing, by bass fishing. I mean, the two activities are not, they don't, they don't help each other. Now, I think being on teams, and I think, there are certain elements. Let's just take football
But
and
bass fishing with like pitching is
yeah,
somewhat
no,
similar,
I
right?
don't think you're going to get any better pitching by bass
Gotcha.
fishing. But if you just took two sports, let's say football and baseball,
Sure.
that you're not going to get any interference in learning like you might with baseball and golf or something like that, where you're going to get these, like,
Right.
cross
Confused.
connections, and the baseball swing and the golf swing are similar but not the same. And so, those two sports would be tough to play, I think, at a high level
Sure.
together. But you can football and baseball. But don't think that, like, by playing football you're going to be better at baseball. And
Sure.
if you took the fall and you instead of playing football decided to work on your swing, you would definitely be better
Sure.
earlier at baseball than you would if you just played football. Now, there's other considerations. One, I think football offers some physical toughness that's now, especially at the lower levels, missing in the game
Absent.
of baseball, which I'm a huge believer in. And there's also, being careful not to burn kids out. So I think playing a multiplicity of sports keeps everything interesting.
Right.
And I remember, like, when I was a freshman in high school, I didn't play football my freshman year because I wanted to try to make the varsity team in baseball. So I did fall ball, fall baseball, into the spring played baseball all the summer after my freshman year in high school. When it came back to that fall, I was burnt out. I was like,
Right.
I hate baseball.
Right.
Like, I don't want to play anymore. So I played football. And
Right.
my dad didn't like that, but he was okay with it because I think he recognized that I needed a mental break. So the notion that playing other sports is going to help you be a better baseball player is not true, but there is benefit to playing other sports. And, just understanding that it's not about, like, if you want to get really good at hitting, you need to hit. That's it.
Right. I love that you highlighted it in that way, because I think majority of our sort of industry-wide opinions on, for instance, youth training are really adopted opinions in there. Once something gains popularity, as you know, kids play multiple sports. That's how you're going to get to Division I in these single sports. But reality is, for a skill-laden sport such as baseball and the actual skill of hitting a baseball, it requires so much repetition. We referenced smiling a moment ago, to be really good at it, that the more time you spend doing something else, that's time that you don't have to build volume in that particular thing. But I think if you do see a value in playing multiple sports, this is what's so important to really hammer down. It's because to get through baseball from 10 years old to the big leagues, which, by the way, no one is going to do, you've got to love the sport. And when you don't play other sports, you're going to likely get burned out. When you want it to be fun every time it comes around to baseball season, and I think that's what gets lost with multiple sport training. It's not really as much the skill development or kind of raw skills you might get from running track or playing football that will help you in baseball. Yes, that may be a small component of it, but it's just the mental refreshing of doing something different, giving your body a rest from those overuse patterns.
Yeah.
To avoid injury, and then getting back and enjoying it so you can approach it with some actual zest.
Yeah, when baseball season rolls around, you want to be excited about
Yeah.
playing baseball. And so the other component to that is that the reality is, this is going to sound terrible, but your kid's probably not playing in the big leagues.
And that's why I said it's not going to happen.
Yeah, so it's just and the kids that are going to play in the big leagues, it's really not going to matter if they hit year round or take 3 months off to play football in the fall. Like, they're going to play in the big leagues. So
thank you.
There is a God-given component to all of this, that I think you can't lose sight of. I personally am an advocate of playing a lot of sports growing up, because I would love to see guys compete in a multitude of arenas, and there's more to. I think that I do think that competing in other sports can help as a competitor,
Right.
and learning how to manage anxiety and learning how to beat one guy against another guy. Like, I got to beat this guy. Like, let me figure it out. I think there's some things that can be helpful to actually playing the game of baseball. But if you're talking about, like, the straight skill acquisition part of it, you're not going to get better at hitting by playing football.
Right.
So I just, although I think we haven't confused the topic, but just for the record, I like to see people play different sports growing up, because I believe that, number one, there is benefit to competing in multiple arenas. Number two, if your kid is good enough to play in the major league, it's going to happen no matter, like if he plays baseball year round or not. And if he's not going to play, if he's not good enough, playing year round is not going to do anything for him. So you might as well let him enjoy his athletic experiences while he still can.
Right. Let's go back to what you just said about, by the way, if your kid is intended to play in the big leagues or something along those lines, he's going to get there probably. If he's not, he's not. The topic of natural selection, and this is a fun one for us. Oftentimes at the facility, one of our favorite topics when we're working with like the Major League Baseball group and an NFL client or two comes through, the baseball players want to know what's it like playing football? What position would I play? If you had to plug me in this Sunday for the Texans, where would you put me? Would you put me at slot receiver? If I had to play running back and I got 20 carries, could I gain 10 yards? Those kind of things are fun to talk about for guys that are kind of at that level, but in different sports. With natural selection, one of our favorite debates is in the world of team sports, which position, and maybe give me a couple, would you say is most defined by natural selection? I have an opinion about within baseball what it is, but just sports wide, some of us are eliminated from contention at birth for certain sports.
NBA center.
That's a great one.
Would be one, and
in fact, that's probably the best one.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not 7 feet tall, or I'd 6'11",
7 feet now probably, and 1 in 17 7-footers worldwide play in the NBA. That tells you how rare it is. So if you can walk and chew gum, but you're 7 feet, you probably got a shot.
Yeah. So that would be pretty. I mean, you could almost look at your parents and figure that out from the cradle, like you're done.
Yeah.
I'd mentioned sumo wrestling. That's one that would be a real specific genetic skill set.
Also requires a lifestyle commitment to sort of sustain that amount of weight.
Right, exactly. And so, I mean, I think they're really and truly like the NBA center is probably, that's a mic drop argument over kind of thing. So
I think the NFL left tackle, the 32 starting left tackles, there are 30 starting NBA centers in the world. The NFL left tackle would just look at the combination of attributes required.
Right.
6'5" plus, 300 plus pounds, feet and hands both very coordinated and quick. I think toughness will eliminate a lot of people through that journey.
Yeah.
So, but within the game of baseball, I think no disrespect to hitters. In fact, from an athletic perspective, my opinion is pretty clear that hitters probably are more versatile athletes on average when they get to the major league level. They're probably better athletes to start with. But I think pitching requires so much mobility to do it well and to do it healthfully for long. I think pitchers are born, not made.
Yeah, I think that's, it's one of those things in the baseball realm. The two skills that and I've coached now for probably 7 years. Since I've been out for 10. Actually longer than that. I've coached 9 of the 10 years that I've been out. And the 1 year I didn't was COVID 2020 when nobody was really playing. And what I've seen that's really tough to coach is strike throwing ability and strike zone judgment from a hitter's standpoint. So like as a hitter, identifying ball strike and being able to we call it like managing the strike zone, commanding the zone, like not swinging at balls that you shouldn't, and knowing when to swing. That's a very difficult skill. It seems like hitters either have the ability to do that or they don't. And then from a pitching standpoint, like either guys are strike throwers or they're not. And it's really difficult to take a guy that's not a strike thrower and get any kind of consistency out of them. It's like you got to find those guys that have a knack for getting the ball over the plate. And a lot of that goes to what you're talking about. It's like, are they flexible enough to get into good positions consistently enough to enables them to repeat their delivery? Because that's what it is, like repeatability and, and some of it is mental too. I mean, it's like, you got to have a little bit of a riverboat gambler mindset, because as a pitcher, when you throw the ball over the plate, there's a chance it could get hit. And if it does get hit, you can't let that keep you from continuing to do that. So we see a lot of guys that they get so anxious about being hit that they can't throw strikes, or they won't throw them. Right. So that's kind of probably a deeper topic. But I would say those two skills above any other that I've been around in baseball are the two that are either almost impossible to teach or the toughest to teach.
So staying kind of on that line, with elite level hitting in Major League Baseball, one of the things that I found so interesting is I think the casual fan might assume that reaction capability, reaction time, reflex is a big part of hitting because there's, zero point 0.4 seconds at 90 miles an hour from the hand to the mitt. And one study that I found interesting, actually a former teammate of yours, maybe around 2009, I can reference this in the show notes, but there was a study done at Washington University in St. Louis, the physical therapy lab. Dr. Shirley Sarman did a reaction time test and took a huge number of college students that were non-athletes, 200 plus students at Washington University, and then tested Albert Pujols' reaction time. He was in the 67th percentile amongst non-athlete college students. And you think, all right, maybe the best hitter of a generation, 10 straight years, 300, 30 home runs, 100 RBIs. I think he's the only player to do that at the time. And his reaction time in a lab setting was only in the 67th percentile, which I think speaks to how there's plenty enough time to make the right decision actually for a normal person, for someone who has kind of requisite reaction capability. It really comes down to, they surmised by the study, sort of on the lines of what you were talking about, the ability to recognize a pattern, like pitch identification, location estimation, or however you would describe that. Speak to that a little bit in terms of the ingredients that make a hitter at that level truly elite.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I mean, I didn't know exactly where you were going with it, but I was prepared to point out that human reaction times is kind of relatively the same. Like, I mean, across the board, within obviously a few things here that
Sure.
I don't know how they measure that, but microseconds or however it is. But
Yeah.
there's a very predictable range of that, and most baseball players are right there, like you're talking about, kind of middle of the road ish, but. Another study that they did that really kind of identifies what it is a visual acuity, which has to do with how well you pick up objects in space and how well you can estimate, like depth perception. There's a depth perception component to it. How quickly is it traveling? When is it going to get to me? All of those kinds of things. And there's a book called The Sports Gene. I think
David Epstein.
Yeah, Epstein. I was thinking, I want to say Theo, but I was like, no, that's the GM.
Yeah.
But anyway, he wrote it, and there was a really interesting chapter on this visual acuity that they can measure, and it's like, I'm making this number up, but let's say that less than 5% of the population has a visual acuity score over 80, and with 100 being the best.
Sure.
But like 85% of major league hitters have a visual acuity score over 80. So
interesting.
It's basically like, and the Dodgers at one point had a optometrist that could predict with a pretty good degree of certainty which of their hitters were going to make it to the big leagues and which wouldn't, just based on this visual acuity score. So there's a lot more that goes into hitting a fastball than just being able to react to it. And a lot of it is like, I call it like the special brain that can identify the speed, spin, and location, and also is athletic enough to be able to be in a good position to deliver the barrel once the brain says, yes, that's in a good spot. So,
but so much of it beyond the identification point, the pattern recognition, as we referenced, it's all an estimation after that. In other words, because the same book you were referencing talks about, I think it was the study was referenced there, but within 10 feet of the plate, the ball is invisible.
That's right.
Like, no, the old thing.
Just watch it come off the barrel.
I want you to watch.
Yeah.
Impossible.
Yeah.
The human eye can't see that. So you can watch it travel 50 feet, 6 inches, whatever it is, and from that point in, your eye can't track it. It's moving too fast, too proximal to you.
That's right.
So that's really interesting to kind of hear your opinion on it. But I think it's also the special brain that you referenced is the combination of the visual acuity, the ability to recognize a pattern, which is not your eye. That looks familiar. My database tells me it's going to be ending up here,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, uh-huh.
and then estimating all that and then putting, I mean, it's truly one of the most difficult things to do in all of professional
Well, and
sports.
it's remarkable too, because you know, there's certain things that when I talk about hitting, especially like at the big league level, from my perspective, there's certain things that people are like, wait a minute, that doesn't seem right. But one of the things is you don't decide to swing, you decide to not swing. Like, so,
Uh,
you know, the game happens so fast. And if you stood in the batter's box and watched a 100-mile-an-hour fastball, you'd be like, there's no way anybody could hit this. And I would think the same thing every year when I would go to spring training in the first couple of days and you're watching those pitchers throw and you're like, there is no way I'm going to be able to hit that.
right.
But what it is you get in there and you start to swing, and then you rely on your special brain to tell you either yes, continue, or no, shut your swing down. And one of the things that happens as you get older, and I'm not sure why, this would be a great physiological study, and I know it's true because I've talked to other guys that had it happen. But the older I got, the less ability I had to check my swing. So in other words, like I could stop my swing when I was younger a lot easier than I could when I was older. And what ends up happening then is if you don't check your swing and you just end up going a little bit too far, well, then you know, in the past that would have been a ball that you took. Now it's a strike, you know, and you either strike out or it gets you in a bad count. And now
That might be a reflex thing,
yeah,
a reaction, like the
yeah,
ability to stop the swing.
maybe a muscle elasticity thing. As you
Yeah,
get older, you lose some elasticity. I don't know.
sure.
I mean, that would be more of your area. My one thing is myelin, so you would have to take
Yeah,
over from there. But
but we'll defer to you on anything myelin related
that's right,
going
and then
forward.
you
Yeah.
can fill in the gaps. The other thing that I think is interesting is that as a hitter, you can actually see sometimes like a guy's finger in a certain spot on the ball, like as the pitcher's delivering it, like especially on like a changeup, you can kind of see like these fingers
It's
that
wild.
are above the top of the ball,
Yeah.
and just they're one of the ways you survive as a big league hitter is it's very, and the guys that are the toughest to hit are when every pitch looks exactly the same. They call it tunneling,
Right.
you know, where a guy, you know, throws a fastball, and then if he throws his changeup, it looks like the same pitch.
Right.
But most guys can't do that. And I would say 90% of big league hitter or big league pitchers on their off speed pitch, there's something that you can see that lets you know it's not a fastball.
Interesting.
And so as a hitter, the better you are at picking up on those little cues, and it could be the guy slowed his body down, or he slowed his arm down, or you saw his finger sticking up, or the ball, like instead of coming straight out of his hand, pops straight up, and then you know immediately that's an off speed pitch. That's how you survive as a big
That's
league hitter.
fascinating.
And so
And are those conscious things?
they're not conscious. They're conscious after the fact.
They're things that hitters may talk about
Afterwards.
after the
Yeah,
fact.
like I can remember seeing, like the thing happens too fast. Like there is no conscious
Right.
thought when you're in the batter's box, and then you're in the middle of trying to hit. It's a
Right.
pure reaction. But the brain, this is where it's like it's so fascinating because it happens so fast, and the brain and the body work together so fast. It's like it's instantaneous. It's like the second I see fingers, I know it's a changeup,
Right.
and my body reacts like that
Yeah.
quick. I mean,
Yeah.
it's second I see that, and it's just incredible. And that's where the learning, you know, that you've seen that, you know, you've experienced that over and over and over and over again. You just condition your brain and your body to work together in that
Sure.
way. So there's a lot of factors that go into like making a good big league hitter, beyond kind of chasing the holy grail of mechanics, which that would be, if I had a soapbox topic to get off my chest, it would be, you know, these, you've got parents and a whole generation of kids that are conditioned to think, well, if I just learn the right hitting mechanics, then I'm going to be the next Babe Ruth. The mechanics are a significant part of being a good hitter, but it's a small part in comparison to what really makes a successful major league hitter. And so, you know, you've got these kids and they want you to coach every swing. You know, they make a
Right.
bad swing and it's like, what did I do wrong? Dude, round ball, round bat. You just mishit it. Like take
Right.
another couple of hundred swings
If you're
and then
great, it's going to happen
yeah,
74% of the time.
and you got parents that are like, oh well, you know, let me get my kid with this hitting instructor, and the magic didn't happen with him, so I'm going to go to this one, and the magic didn't happen with him, and you know what, the kid's just not good enough. I mean, that, you
Right.
know, at the end of the day,
Right.
there is no magic holy grail of
Yeah.
hitting mechanics. So
That takes me back to the era of parents getting their kids muscle biopsies to figure out what sport they should play.
Right? Yeah. I mean, it's
Like if you want to know if your kid should run track, put them on a line by all the other kindergartners, have them run, and whoever finishes
that kid
first,
right
that
there.
kid's got
Yeah,
fast twitch.
exactly. Yeah. No,
Save yourself the lab test.
Uh-huh. For sure. We could save parents a lot of money. I just bring your kid by and I'll let you know, yep, or nope, that kid, he can't do it. But it's,
but most of them will fall somewhere in between.
yeah, of course. Yeah, we're
joking, but yeah.
It's funny how the compete element of it has been totally lost in favor of if we could just, get the right mechanics.
Well, I think that starts at the top of sports, as we're seeing right now with one of our clients, Kareem Jackson, who has played the game the right way in the NFL for 14 years, hadn't had an unsportsmanlike penalty conduct in 7 years, and now he's being suspended for playing the same way that he does. Toughness is no longer glorified,
right?
Even at the highest level. It's now a threat to safety. Yeah. He was told by the league office that it's his responsibility to look out for the offensive player's safety.
Yeah.
Which can be quite confusing when you're trying to make a play, protect yourself, and
it's crazy for sure. So,
but yeah, I agree with you. Toughness is just
well, and it's just it's really like we're just focusing
grit.
on. So there's a couple of things I think here that where people get their wires crossed, and we're talking about. I don't know who will watch this podcast, but I'm assuming that there'll be some parents that have younger kids that are maybe high school age or middle school age kids that watch it. And one of the things that happens, like when you're taking your cues from the major league, I'll just talk about Major League Baseball because that's what I know. So when you're taking your cues from Major League Baseball and you stop and think about it, the guys that are there are already the best in the world at what they do. So their advantage over their competition is going to come from the minutia of maybe fixing their mechanics, and being in a great position all the time or more consistently. I mean, I know that Corey Seager, great shortstop for the Rangers, has talked about how, like he spends a ton of time looking at video and working with his hitting coach because he wants to be in the exact same position every time, mechanically speaking. That wouldn't be my approach, but obviously it's worked well for him. But my point in saying this is that if you're already one of the greatest in the world and you're looking for an advantage over your competition, the advantages are going to come in the minutia, like and getting into the video and like tweaking every little part of the swing could be productive.
Sure.
But if you take that same approach to a kid that's in high school or that's in middle school, it's counterproductive because now you've got a kid that's worried about too much rather than the task at hand, which is I'm going to beat that guy. Like the pitcher's got the ball on the mound. My swing is good enough. I'm going to get in there and compete and beat him. And so the focus, because of all the stuff that's happened at the big league level, that's trickled down to the lower levels. And now the focus is on the wrong thing.
They're missing the forest.
Yeah, they're missing the forest for the trees. And it's like, it makes sense for the big league guys to be doing that, but it makes no sense for a guy that has yet to compete in high school to do the same thing. And so, I think that that's part of the problem. And,
it's worse in pitching, don't you think?
Oh, yeah. Well,
I think the analytics versus the grit, that kind of equation has gotten so off base with pitching.
Yeah. And there's a couple things to me there too. Like and I don't know what's caused this recent wave of anxiety in kids, but I mean, I personally believe it's social media. Like if kids live their life on Instagram and on Snapchat, and their lives and everything they say and every picture they post is constantly being judged. So it's either being liked or disliked, and so if you think about it and you live life where everything you do is being judged as good or bad, that would create a lot of low level anxiety that you may or may not even be aware of. So then when it comes to an additional performance like on a baseball field or on a football field or wherever, that anxiety then becomes overwhelming. And I see that a ton as a coach. Like these kids, they get inundated with anxiety. And so as a result, they want to focus on things that don't require wins and losses. So what I see from a lot of our pitchers is they want to know, what's my velocity? What's my spin rate? And the reason they're so hung up on that is because there's nobody to beat or there's nobody to get beat by. It's just like I'm playing a computer game and either I hit my personal best or I didn't, but if I didn't, that doesn't make me feel bad. Like it's not a loss. It's just me against a computer. And so and again, this is all my theory. Hitters the same way. They want to talk about my exit velo. They have the hit tracks deal. How far did I hit it on hit tracks? Well, that has nothing to do with competition, winning and losing.
Right.
And so the focus has become on mechanics. It's focused on things that don't require a winner and a loser. And the problem is the game is played with winners and losers.
Right.
And so we're focusing on the wrong thing. And I talk to people all the time. I'm like, hey, pretend like you were an athlete back in a baseball player that was born in 1950.
Right.
And you're growing up and you want to be a great baseball player. You got no video, you got no strength training knowledge, no nutrition training knowledge.
Right.
What do you do? How do you get to be, because all the things that these kids are now so hung up and focused on are not available to you. There's no batting cages back in the 50s. No pitching machines. No radar guns, hardly. They're available to the common. So what are you going to do? You play the game and you compete and you win competitions. And so that's how those guys grew up. And we've lost that. We've lost a lot of the, that learning the nuances of the game that make it great and that give you an edge as a competitor. So I think we've got to somehow get back to that. I don't see a way to put the genie back in the bottle.
Right. I agree. Once the machine is kind of off and running down the track, it becomes
hard
different. Because I even tell parents, as much as I don't enjoy, all the focus on skill, and it's not like playing the game, the inefficiency of like travel baseball now, for instance. You got a single mom she's got a talented son trying to get her son the best advantage, doesn't know what the alternatives are. She didn't grow up in baseball. They're just going to go along with the program because the kid needs to have the same exposure as everyone else. But in reality, for skill development, if we're going to isolate that, it's probably better off spending 30 minutes, hitting with a coach off of a tee one weekend, than traveling, spending money, getting 6 at-bats in a tournament in Waco,
Well, it's hard to isolate the one thing. I think it's a combination. I mean, guys have to play to be good, and they have to be skillful to be good. And so, there's times to work on your skill, there's times to play. So I think but I do think that if I could change one thing about the current state of amateur baseball, I want to see guys that love to compete, that love the wins and losses, and that that don't celebrate the wins excessively and don't get too down when they get beat. I mean, that's what I like to talk about the joy of battle. That's a real thing. When you're in there and you're just swinging haymakers and you may be getting hit and you may be doing some damage, but it's the joy of being in the competition that's what really makes a player.
Sure.
Beyond the physical stuff that you can't do anything about, the stuff that we've talked about that God's gifted you, beyond any of that, the guys that really make players that win and lose games for you are guys that have that enjoyment of the competition.
Love it.
We're going to take a quick break.
Okay,
welcome back.
All right, welcome back from the break. We're going to pick up where we left off. Just now, Lance, we were talking about coaching, and you and I sort of share a common view of the development process. I think that's something that's resonated dually with us over time. What are some of the biggest challenges you see in coaching youth athletes? You touched on, or this generation of athletes, you touched on it a bit, but maybe expound.
Yeah, I think, sometimes it's hard to connect with the current generation just because the way we grew up was a lot different. Things were, I think societal norms shift with time, and these guys have grown up in a totally different era than we did. And so one of the challenges for me is I sense, and not in a way that is intentional or that is nefarious, but there is a lack of respect, or there's a familiarity, I think is a better way to say it, between coach and player that I personally never experienced. The guys will say things to me or ask me things that I would never have dreamt of asking my coach, my college coach. And learning how to deal with that is different. And you can't coach them in the same way that we were coached. I mean, I guess you can. I don't know that it would be as successful in terms of being hard and negative and those kinds of things, they don't respond, it seems like, as well to that. So for me, it's like, okay, how can I connect with these guys and at the same time teach them to respect authority? And look, I'm not your friend. I'm not your contemporary. I'm your coach.
Sure.
And that comes out in different ways. Like, occasionally we'll have to remind guys that you can't just call me by my last name, because
Sure.
you've got these kids that'll be like, hey, Berkman. I'm like, no, it's Coach Berkman.
Sure.
Those types of things. And then in terms of trying to stay positive with them, trying to encourage them more than criticizing, I think, is something else that they respond better to that than the criticism. So those are some adjustments that I've had to make, and it's something that I see as a little bit of a problem in the younger generation.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think so much of that is generational. It's just a kind of a shift in the way that, kids relate to adults. A lot of that is just, I think from a parental and a coaching perspective, it may be fear in cases that we have to cater to it to a degree, because you don't want to lose communication with the kid. You don't want them to, turn their back on the program or whatever it may be. So trying to kind of keep connected to them becomes a challenge when you having to do it by different means from the way that we were maybe, raised with it. But
Yeah, and I think for me, it's like, it's our job as coaches to connect with kids. It's
Sure.
not, it's not the kids' job to adjust to us necessarily, although I do think in some ways that that's healthy and good. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if we want to reach these kids, and we want to stay connected with them, we want to have the platform to have influence on their lives, then, we have to adjust the way that we coach. And I think, I've tried to do that with our guys, and I do think that teaching them some of the lessons that you and I learned growing up is an important part of that process. So
Sure.
it's not that we just allow rampant disrespect or things to just, we don't totally bow to the current cultural phenomena. We want to try to craft these kids into a way that the things that I believe in strongly, and one of the underpinnings of that is just respect for authority and respect for older people, older males in particular, when you're dealing with younger males. And
Sure.
I know, like with our generation, there was almost this, you had to earn your way into the presence and acceptance of older males.
Right.
And the younger generation now, they just assume that, that acceptance and
Sure.
that this is my right to be in this company, where we felt like we had to earn that. So that's something I think, that I've tried to work with and around and try to teach kids, what I think is a healthy way of approaching relationship with authority or with older adults.
Right. Speaking of relationship, maybe talk a bit about how much of coaching is the ability to relate or sort of reel an athlete in. The old adage, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. I think it definitely applies with coaching.
Yeah, and I try to I really, the way I tell the kids this on their recruiting visit, and I try to do it. I mean, I treat these kids like I would my own children. Like I'm raising these kids
Right.
just like I am raising my own children.
Right.
And so I love my kids. I encourage my kids, but I also am not afraid to discipline my kids or challenge them when I think they need to be challenged. We let our kids fail. We let our kids have responsibility to the degree that they've earned it. So, I mean, all of those concepts are what we try to do with our players at Houston Christian. So I treat them literally just like I would if they were my own sons.
Sure.
And hopefully they respond to that.
Yeah. So to pivot with this generation to the skill aspect of it, and kind of, there's so much teaching that takes place now. Much of it is online. They're influenced from so many different directions. What are some of the trends that you see with hitting? And maybe we could start with just grips, because for the casual fan or the relative layman, the baseball bat is gripped with two hands always. Um, so much of that doesn't get seen on TV, like the actual, position of grip. But I know there's a lot of variance just by being close up with hitters in a cage over time. Tell us a little bit about kind of trends that you're seeing in that way, and maybe some of the other big things that you may disagree with or not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would start the whole discussion by saying it's not rocket science, or as a friend of mine would say, it's not rocket surgery. The hitting mechanics are they are and should be simple. Like they're easy to talk about because there's not 100 different ways to swing the bat correctly. There's one way to swing it right, and you can go. And I have a montage that I'd like to show our hitters, literally from Babe Ruth all the way through every era to Aaron Judge and the modern day player. The swings are identical. Like there is one right way to swing the bat. There's not 100 right ways to swing it, and it's not complicated. And one of the, now within the framework, it's kind of like the gospel. There are certain things that are immutable about Christianity, like we have our tenets of the faith that are non-negotiable, and then there are things that are kind of like left up to the believer and the individual conscience. Hitting mechanics are the exact same way. The bones of the mechanics are non-negotiable, but the expression of some different positions can allow for body types and or personal preference.
Sure.
And you mentioned one of those is grip, and I have a big I'm a big believer in a certain way of gripping the bat. Although people have success doing it other ways, I just feel like and I just like I tell our guys, like I'm not you know you for everything you say, well, you can't do this, you can find a big leaguer that maybe does it that's outside of the what we would say the core mechanical principles. But one of those is the grip. So like I'm a big believer in the way that guys grip the bat is really important and being able to control the barrel. And this used to be the very first thing that they taught you. Like when I was a kid, like the very first thing that my dad taught me was how do you hold the bat. And the way that I was taught to do it and the way I feel is the best is to have the bat in the fingers. And there's a variety of reasons for that, which I'll enumerate here shortly. But basically, in its simplest form, you just line up what I call the knocking knuckles. So the knuckles that you would use if you went to knock on somebody's front door, those are the knuckles that you should line up. And that puts the bat in the fingers instead of back in the palm. And so when I line those knocking knuckles up, like I said, it puts the handle of the bat in my fingers where I have an ability to manipulate it even in the middle of my swing. And so that would be maybe the first thing I would say. The first benefit would be that it promotes barrel control. It's just like if I gave you a hammer and I asked you to let's say that coffee cup was a nail and we're going to hammer that nail. If you grab the hammer way back in your hand like this, you don't have nearly the control. It's more of a gross movement. Sure. Where if I put the handle of the hammer in my fingers, now I have the ability to deliver the blow with some accuracy. So it's the same thing when I go to deliver the barrel into the ball. When I have the bat in my fingers, I have control over where this barrel goes. Sure. Better than I do if it's back in my palm like this.
Right.
And so I call, a lot of guys want to take this grip because it's a lot stronger. I call it a gorilla grip or a kung fu grip. The origin of that goes all the way back to rice, but it's basically where instead of having these knuckles lined up, I now rotate my hands and I have the bigger knuckles in a line, and you can see how that puts the barrel back or puts the handle of the bat back in my hand, and it promotes tension in my forearms and in my arms, which is another reason I like the bat in the fingers, because I like to have the upper body be loose. And when I'm in my batting stance, I like to feel the tension in my legs, and I like my upper body to be loose. So having the bat in my fingers promotes looseness, whereas when I have it back in my palm, now I'm tense and tight. So the looseness, the accuracy that you can deliver the barrel and make mid-swing adjustments, to the ball is done better when the bat's in your fingers. The last thing about it, when you get to a certain point, to have a really good swing, an on-plane swing, like we say, we want the barrel to be behind the ball as long as possible. And so we want to get the barrel behind the ball efficiently, and then we want to keep the barrel moving towards the middle of the field, which is where the ball's coming from, as long as possible. And so if I have the barrel in my fingers, well, I'll start with the other. If I have an over-rotated grip, I'm going to get to a certain point in my swing where the barrel's naturally going to want to turn over to relieve the pressure that I have in my wrist and my elbow, in my hand. I get there with the bat way back in my hand, and it's going to want to turn over. It's really difficult to keep the barrel moving to the middle of the field with, the bat way back in your hand. Now, this is where everybody is built different. So some people have greater wrist flexibility and
Sure.
flexion or whatever, mobility than
Mm-hmm.
others. And so maybe for them, they can have the bat back in their hand and still keep the barrel moving. But for me, when I get to a certain point, man, that barrel really wants to turn over to relieve that pressure. So if I get here to my point of tension and then I just rotate my hand underneath, now I have almost unlimited ability to keep the barrel moving to the middle of the field. And if you see when I did that, when I moved my hand, it just lined up the knuckles
Right.
that we talked about initially. So to me, having the barrel or the bat gripped in this position gives me almost an unlimited ability to move the barrel to the middle of the field. I can move it to the middle of the field as long as my arms are long. So eventually I'm going to run out of
Right.
ability to do it. And then that's when, the swing starts
Right.
to turn off the ball. But I want to keep the barrel moving behind the ball and through the ball as long as possible.
Yeah.
So that's the reason. Those are the reasons for having that grip the way that I like to have it.
Sure. And just to add to the quote gorilla grip, there's a particular hitter that I see who's a very good hitter that he seems to grip it more in this position, good major league hitter. But what I see with that is effects up the kinetic chain. Like you referenced the wrist a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but the moment I go into this more pronated position with my wrist and hands, now I'm seeing the shoulder and more internal rotation. The elbow is now less athletic. I'm more stuck in a position, whereas here you just see fluidity, kind of up
Right.
the chain all the way around. So
Yeah.
it's almost like when you get that really over strong grip, you're having to rotate as one big piece as opposed to a more athletic kind of multi-joint swing.
Right.
The component nature of the lighter grip that you're referencing seems to kind of lend itself to athleticism and adjustment capability.
Right. And the easiest way for the layperson to visualize what the swing actually is like cracking a whip.
Yeah.
And so like it's the swing is not really a swing. I teach our hitters like I'm either throwing the barrel at the ball or I'm cracking the whip when I go to swing. And
Gotcha.
so the more laxity that I have in my upper body and the more what you're referencing, kind of that multi-joint looseness where the barrel is now being delivered this way
Hmm.
instead of in one what I call a wooden Indian swing where you
Right.
have, the bat and it's just like one big
Sure.
rotation. It's tough,
Yeah.
So to me, the grip is it really promotes the cracking of the whip. Or think about like the swing and throwing a ball are very similar. So when you go to throw a baseball, if you're trying to maximize your velocity, you have the ball in your fingers. You don't, in order to take velocity off the ball, you push it back in your palm like a
Change up.
changeup. And
Yeah.
so it's that last little, release of the most distal joint that you have that can sometimes,
Exactly.
accelerate the implement that much more. So that's
Yeah.
why I like to see the bat held in the fingers, because I can get that last little snap that you can't get when the bat's way back in
Right.
your, in
It
your
allows
palm.
for that summation of force, like boom, boom, boom. It
That's
all
right.
kind of
And
it
it's
adds up to
delivered
more.
at
Yeah.
that time. So, but look, I mean, that said, there are hitters, and there's some really good hitters that have grips that are what I would consider over rotated.
Hmm.
And like the other thing I like to tell hitters is if you can stand on your head and hit 300, then do it. Like I don't, like I'm not
Right.
married to you have to do it this one way about certain things,
Right.
and the grip is one of them. And I've, there's too many examples of guys that do it at a high level, that have what I would consider to be over rotated
Sure.
grips.
Another favorite of mine is when Lance tells a hitter to this time do a cartwheel.
Yeah.
When he's frustrated with somebody doing the same thing over and
Yeah,
over
the ability to, this goes back
improvise.
to, it's like, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about. One of the challenges of teaching or coaching the younger generation is they're so visual, like you almost have to show them on a video for them to
Right.
understand what's going on. And it's like the lack of ability to make competitive adjustments just innately seems to be lacking. And I think some
Sure.
of that stems from when we were kids growing up. I mean, how many hundreds of hours of pickup football did you play in your backyard or in the street?
I mean, summertime it was sun up to sundown.
It was just
I
like
had to,
constantly. And
yeah.
so invariably when you're playing those games, you're going to be asked to guard somebody that's faster than you are, that's quicker than you are. And you figure out pretty quickly in that competition, I got to make some concessions to where, if I keep doing the same thing over and over again, this guy's going to run right by me and our team's going to get beat. So I use this example all the time. Like if I know a guy is faster than I am, well, I'm going to give him about a 15-yard cushion because he ain't running by me.
Right.
He can run by me one time, and then I figure out I can't run with this guy. Well, I got to give him a cushion. That's a competitive adjustment.
Sure.
I don't see that as much with young players. It's like they do have a tendency to do the same thing over and over and over and over again until you can show them, okay, look at what you're doing. Here's the result. Let's do something different. Right. I don't care if you do a cartwheel and swing the bat, but it has to be different than what you just did. Right. And that part of it, I think, has to be taught. And some guys are afraid to try new things. The exploration, the experimentation is not encouraged, I don't think. And that's why I like when we talked way back in the beginning about not taking your kid to a hitting instructor until they get to be 10 or 12. Little kids don't care. Right. They experiment. There's some freedom to the way they're swinging that if you get them in there with a hitting guy from a young age, well, they're going to get them into, everything got to, and then they become more robotic. And then they become
their creativity.
Yeah, they get scared to try new things. So I think, I don't even know how we got off talking about that, but I do love to see guys that are willing to make adjustments, to try different things and see what happens.
Sure. What's the most common, away from the grip now, what's the most common thing that you're maybe seeing nowadays that just wasn't really taught, 20 years ago?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. One would be what we call launch angle, or this, teaching everybody to swing up on the ball to try to get the ball in the air, which
versus a more flat swing.
Yeah, and I like to talk about the on-plane swing because swinging up is just as bad as swinging down. The whole upswing came in because there were a lot of coaches that would talk about like hit down on the ball, which is a great hitting cue for certain players.
Sure.
The problem with both of those things is you can't coach every hitter the same way. So if you told every single hitter to swing down on the ball, you'd be doing some of them a disservice.
Sure.
And if you tell every single hitter that they need to try to hit the ball in the air, you're doing some of them a disservice. Because guys either, there's really two kinds of dysfunction. One is what I would call the collapsing backside and the attacking from getting too deep or too steep, too deep, too early. Okay. Like, so in other words, we either see guys that want to drop the barrel, they lose their barrel here and they're too deep and steep too early, and then they swing up and across. Or you've got the guys that are too steep this way, they come down and across into the ball. So you're either underneath and over the top, or you're outside, down and across. Those are really your two kind of swingers. And there's way more guys now, especially that are collapsing backside, that get the barrel too deep too early, and then they end up swinging up than there are the other way. So really and truly, the hit down on the ball command, if I had to pick one of two, it would be that. I'd tell every hitter to swing down on the ball because that corrects
more problems than
the biggest dysfunction that I'm seeing, which is that collapsing backside. And it's as a result of like these guys, there's a handful of big leaguers that have come out and been like, yeah, I think about hitting the ball up. Why would you hit the ball on the ground? That's true. And for some guys, the swing thought to swing up on the ball is what gets them on plane with the ball. So there's a difference between
feel and real. But in reality, what they're doing is probably not that different.
Exactly. It's not different at all.
The real versus feel.
Right. Yeah. You could take, let's say, JD Martinez, who credits the upswing thought with revolutionizing his career. Justin Turner's the same kind of deal. Like they feel like their careers really turned around when they started thinking about trying to hit the ball in the air as opposed to hitting down on the ball. If you looked at their swings and you looked at a guy like Freddie Freeman as an example, who thinks about hitting down on the ball, that's his swing thought. Right. Their swings are going to be very similar. Right. The whole key is to try to get the barrel behind the ball efficiently and keep it there a long time for the on-plane swing. So if your tendency is to be underneath and over the top of the ball, the swing thought of swinging down will get you where you need to be. If you're a guy that naturally comes too steep into the ball and you're a down and across slasher, the upswing thought is what's going to get you on plane. So the key is like understanding what you feel like's happening and what really is happening are two different things. And once you identify what your dysfunction is, then you can attack it with the right swing thought. Right. The problem comes in when guys are coached with one swing thought for the entire group, and you're going to you're going to help some guys, but it's also going to hurt some guys.
Strength training is very much the same, I'd say.
Yeah.
The bar squat is not going to suit everyone. It may be the perfect prescription for somebody with a great spine and loose hips, but it may end someone else's career.
Yeah, and that's where that's your job as a coach. That's really where you make your money as a coach, is by being able to identify what is this guy doing wrong and how can I help him get better.
Right.
And it's not the same for every player.
Sure. And I think what you touched on with like players, the real versus feel, and some players, it's the right cue to get them to do whether it's what's actually happening or not doesn't matter. It's putting them in a position to do what they need to do. It's just manipulative cueing to get them, based on their, in most cases, limited understanding of what their body's able to do. It puts them in the right place. It kind of sheds light on, you touched on earlier, how quick an action it is when you identify a pitch and enact a swing.
Mm-hmm.
These things happen so fast. I see it even at high-level golf. A lot of times these athletes have less of an idea of what they're actually doing than you would expect. It's just, they're so physically gifted.
Right.
Their awareness of what they're doing is often pretty low. And you're surprised when you get into conversations with them. But so they're just searching in cases for cueing, and that's where coaching becomes so important, I think, and being able to meet someone where they are and find something that resonates.
Well, and I think you can, especially you mentioned golf, but baseball the same exact way. Like the sometimes less information is better, and you talked about the cueing. So really, to me, like the best coaches are able to get players to do or to swing the bat the way they want them to without overloading them with information. So if a guy, this you hear and you hear all kind of things. There's so much crazy talk on Twitter and with these guys that are teaching hitting that and look, I mean, I'm not one of those guys. You don't have to have hit at a high level to be a good hitting instructor. Sure. I don't believe that. Like there are plenty of guys that couldn't hit their way out of a wet paper sack that are really good hitting instructors. But there's also a lot of guys out there that didn't play or that don't really understand what it means to, what happens when you stand in the box and how quick it happens and the reactive nature of it. And they're in cages all day long, and they come up with these things that they try to separate themselves. I'm going to be the guy that coaches this unique thing that unlocks the potential of thousands of and I laugh at some of it. The second I hear somebody talk about like thinking about what your scap is doing in the middle of a baseball swing, you can know immediately that they've never really swung a bat at a ball competitively. Like you can't think about.
They would not use that term anyway.
Huh?
They wouldn't use that term.
No, right, but you can't.
It's go time.
If a hitter is thinking about his scap while he's trying to hit a ball, he'll never be successful. So learning how to give guys cues that maybe get their scap in a better position without them thinking about it is the key to being a good coach.
Sure. So on that note, let's just do a quick fire round with some popular hitters over the course of time. One of the things that's great about you is that you're a student of the game. You love baseball. You've seen so many swings, and I think you have an ability to kind of see things quickly. So in a sentence or so, I'm just going to call out some names of major league hitters. Tell me maybe what stands out about them as a hitter, their swing, their approach, whatever it is, and then we'll just kind of move on quickly.
All right.
Jose Altuve.
So I think Altuve probably has the best strike zone coverage of any hitter I've ever seen. Like, in other words, there's really not a pitch you can throw in the strike zone and sometimes out of the strike zone that he can't hit. I mean, he handles the high ball well. He can hit a ball down and away from him. It's just amazing how, he stands like 3 feet off the plate and you think, well, we could go down and away, but if you do, he hits a bullet. He just his plate coverage is, and the multiplicity of pitches that he can handle is better than any hitter I've ever seen.
How much of that is his diminutive stature?
I think his stature helps him. I do, because I think he's got, one, he's learned because he's, like his strike zone is pretty small. He's learned how to hit pitches that are not necessarily like in the little keyhole window that would be considered like his natural strike zone. And so I think he's a way, way, way better athlete than people give him credit for, and I think that's another big reason for his ability to do that.
Ken Griffey Jr.
Probably the prettiest, most aesthetically pleasing swing that you'll see. Like when you think about the beautiful left-handed, powerful hitting swing. I mean, the Ken Griffey Jr. is the guy that comes to my mind. So I would say he's probably got the most aesthetically pleasing swing, maybe in the history of the game.
Shohei Ohtani.
So it's funny because I thought when I saw him when he first came over in spring training, I was like, we were out there. When I was coaching in high school, and we were playing in a tournament out there, and he had, because I know Anthony, or actually, but this is before Rendon was over there. This Albert, when Albert was over there, Pujols, former teammate, I was able to get our guys on the field. Albert helped me do that, and Shohei was there, and I remember thinking, man, this guy's swing is long. Like, he's going to have to really shorten his swing if he wants to have success over here, in the big leagues. And I thought he would struggle, and I kind of was proven wrong. Like, he was able to, to take a lot of what he does, or what he did in the Japanese league, and it translated better than I thought it would for the American game. So, just he's so powerful. Like, this guy. I mean, I think he's the fastest.
Physically larger than you expected.
Way bigger and way more explosive. Yeah. So just probably, you could maybe make an argument that he's the most explosive baseball player that's ever played. Like,
wow.
From the terms of his ability to throw 100 twitchiness. His ability to create force, maybe as good as it's ever played.
Wow. Alex Bregman.
Alex, I think, really uses his body type. Like, he's not a big guy. He's got shorter levers, and I think he understands that. And he's got a really nice, compact swing. And I feel like that he's probably a guy, to me, that like knows himself and what he's good at and what he can and can't do, and use that to his advantage as good as anybody I've seen. Like, he knows who he is as a hitter. He knows what his strengths and weaknesses are, and he crafts his swing to match up with that.
And his setup, in fairness, is moderately unconventional, right? We talked about back grip a moment ago.
Yeah, and
he'd be a guy that I find to be more
right. And so that kind of plays into he's a I don't want to disrespect him because he's an excellent athlete.
Sure.
So if I call him short and stocky, I don't mean like that. But he is a shorter guy with shorter levers, and I think he understands that. For him, it's not about like the length and the unfolding of the kinetic chain. It's more about the violent, quick uppercut that he can throw, as opposed to like a big haymaker. Like he understands that it's short rotational power that helps him be at his best. And I think part of that is, having that grip that relies more on, when you think about that grip, I think of connectivity and like just really rotational strength when you have, you're not trying to like whip a bat, you're trying to drive it. And I think even his grip helps him play into that.
My favorite player of all time, Rickey Henderson.
Oh yeah. Rickey Henderson, I would say you could make an argument that he's maybe the best all-around player that's ever played, from speed, power, arm strength, defense.
From a statistical accumulation standpoint,
yeah.
Bill James says he's the only player that if you divided his career stats in two, both players would be first ballot Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
Because he's got the 1,500 steals and the 100 leadoff home runs. Whatever.
Right. And just a really talented guy that played a long time, stayed healthy a long time, was productive pretty much every year of his career. So.
But an example of a kid, I actually had an opportunity to meet Rickey in Oakland maybe 2 seasons ago there with Jed Lowry. But I got to quiz him a little bit about his upbringing, because he's the only player, I don't know if you know this, that's in the Hall of Fame to have batted right-handed and thrown left-handed.
Yeah.
And I don't know, can you name a player in today's game in the league that has that combination, a non-pitcher?
I don't know. Like, that was my natural combination.
Yeah, but
left-handed
thrower,
right-handed hitter.
Yeah.
But I learned how to hit right-handed.
Yeah.
So learned how to hit left-handed. Out of the womb, I was a left-handed thrower, right-handed hitter.
Interesting. But your dad kind of knew better.
Yeah, he knew. That's why, because there's not many of them.
And that speaks to, I think, his athleticism, because he grew up, I believe, in Compton, California, and wasn't exposed to a lot of baseball at the time, for whatever reason, and didn't have a ton of informed instruction.
Right.
Therefore, he ends up being, the only one of his kind in terms of right-handed hitting and left-handed throwing.
Yeah, there's not many. There's been a few, like Jason Lane, who I played with in Houston, was that way, left-handed thrower, right-handed hitter.
And that was like a Cowgill maybe with
but it just when you throw left-handed, you're limited where you can play. I mean, you can play in the outfield or first base,
right?
And right-handed hitters are kind of a dime a dozen,
right.
So it's that's a tough combo.
Ted Williams,
the Splendid Splinter, like I think his book, the Science of Hitting, was a foundation for my like I've read that book from cover to cover so many times, and there's a few things in there that I would probably take some issue with or maybe disagree with Ted a little bit on, but you certainly maybe the best hitter ever. Like if you're talking about like statistics and production and consistency, I mean, he's missed 5 years right in the middle of his prime to go fight in World War II.
Wow.
Could be for now. Look, I mean, you can have the old era argument, like he played in an era where it wasn't a global game, and the pitching was probably more watered down than it is now. But for sure, from a statistical standpoint, probably the best ever.
Wow. Now a few of our FSP clients, George Springer.
George is a real springy guy. Like for me, he's like a ball of energy. Whatever he's doing, it's 100%. Like it's like he's bouncing off the walls. He plays that way. And I think once he learned how to calm down a little bit at the plate, like that's helped him a lot. And one of the great postseason performers that we've seen. I mean, he can really get it done when it counts.
Yeah, and I had the special privilege of getting to watch you kind of coach George.
Yeah.
At the facility, and that was really cool to see. Josh Hamilton, a friend of yours, and you played with.
Probably it's sad to say, but maybe the greatest unrealized talent that I've ever seen. I mean, this guy was unbelievable, and if he had been able to keep it on track a little bit, I think he would have been a Hall of Famer. Like, he's definitely a Hall of Fame talent. Like, nobody can hit the ball as far or as hard as he could. Could do it all. Big, huge dude that could run, has a great arm. I mean, great all-around player.
And speaking of Ohtani, having read Josh's book the night before the draft, in whatever it was, 1997 maybe, they knew he was going to be the #1 overall pick to Tampa. They just didn't know if they were taking him as a pitcher or a hitter.
Yeah.
He was throwing 97 from the left side.
Unfreakish. I mean, it's ridiculous.
So Shohei had some competition in that.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah.
Anthony Rendon.
Rendon has got maybe the best hands in terms of like as a hitter. The way his hands operate, and you talk about a guy that can manage a lever and that really maximizes, because he's not a big dude, like he's not 6'4", 210, but he knows the implement and the implementation of the implement. Like he can really whip the bat and just has great hand-eye coordination and a great ability to generate power from a smaller frame.
Yeah. And then another one of my favorites, and I think yours too, but Babe Ruth.
The Babe, yeah. So Babe gets a lot of criticism, like, oh, he wouldn't be as great today. I think he'd be every bit as good with the modern training. Now, he would have to maybe do a few things different, but the crazy thing is if you watch his swing and you compare it to the modern day swing, it's very similar. I mean, it is almost identical in a lot of respects. The one area where it is a little bit different is he had a bigger move in his load to get ready to hit. But from the time his front foot hits the ground till when the barrel is delivered to the baseball, it's almost identical to any great hitter you would watch today.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And that would shock a lot of
that would shock. And the other thing too is how level his swing was. He did not swing up. His swing is very level for a power hitter, maybe the greatest power hitter the game's ever seen. Most people would think, and if they were to imitate him, they would swing like straight up. If you watch his swing in slow motion, you see how level. It's almost like you could set a glass of water on his swing plane. It was so behind the ball and so on plane.
Wow. And this is another fun debate that we have often in the MLB offseason groups. But speaking of the Babe, I think players now feel like they're at a distinct disadvantage relative to the yesteryear hitters that were facing pitching. Pitching has evolved at, I think, a rate maybe that hitting hasn't been able to keep up with quite. Correct me if you think that's unfair. But Babe Ruth, let's say he were hypothetically born in 1993, in Memorial neighborhood here in Houston. He goes to Memorial High School. He has all the kind of common advantages of a relatively affluent kid growing up here. He's able to see pitching as it is now. Does he still become Babe Ruth?
I think 100%. I mean, you're talking about a generation. Like he was so much better than everybody in his generation that it's not even funny. Like if you look at the numbers, I mean, he was head and shoulders above everybody. And you talk about the first true two-way guy. I mean, he was a pitcher
Right.
and a hitter. I mean,
Yep.
at one time he was considered one of the best pitchers the game's ever seen. I think he won 19 games a couple of times as a left-handed pitcher, and before he became what we know as the Babe. So. Um, yeah, I mean, look, the hardware is the physical giftedness, which I think
Right.
undoubtedly the Babe had. The software is what you're exposed to. So he was
I love
exposed
that.
to
I love that quote.
a different kind of software than the modern day player
Yeah.
is. But if you take that same hardware and expose it to the software of today, it's just like when I was in high school, you know, if a kid was throwing 86 or 87, you felt like, man, that guy's throwing gas. Like that was just
Right.
really hard. Now I mean, it's very common to see, you know, several pitchers on high school staff that are pitching 88 to 90, you know, and the velocity that our players see as they're growing up, it makes it to where it's like, it's not that big a deal. Like when we face a guy that's throwing 94, 95, our guys don't struggle with it because
Right.
they've seen it so much. They know how to get their barrel there. So I would make an argument that the tougher thing is just when the Bay played, the composition of Major League Baseball was mostly white. Like it wasn't a global game. You didn't have the best athletes in the world playing it. Now we have literally the best athletes in the world are playing baseball. So I think the
That's
talent
a
pool.
fascinating consideration.
Yeah,
Really, up until the color barrier is broken.
That's right.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's a completely different pool of competition.
That's right.
You know?
Yeah, you were dealing with the best white Americans,
Right. Which
not
is
the
not
best,
an overly
you know,
concentrated group.
exactly. So now it is truly a global game with the best athletes
Right.
that can play it. So it's different in that way. But I do think the Babe would be a very, very good player in today's era.
Yeah. That leads me to, interestingly, to another one of our favorite hypotheticals. We're loaded with them in off season. We have little to talk about, obviously.
That's right.
But best athlete in the world at the time, if you had to compare Michael Phelps to Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt.
Yeah, just any, and this is going to draw the ire of many a swimmer, but any sport where your body is 70% supported by water. I mean, not now you're talking about like if you're talking about like something that's really tough and hard, like swimming is as hard. It's hard. Like that's a very difficult thing to do. But in terms of athleticism, it's not even close. I mean, anything that you do on land, you have to be more athletic than what you do in the water.
Well, equally accomplished, probably, right? From an Olympic gold perspective,
right?
They dominated their sports
Yeah.
at the highest stage. However, what percentage of the world do you think can even swim?
I mean, a high percentage.
You think so?
Yeah.
Compared to those who can run.
Well, everybody can
Correct.
run.
Every able-bodied human has attempted to sprint at some point. I think that's my point is that Usain Bolt is the fastest athlete ever to touch the Earth's surface, as far as we know.
Well,
making him the best athlete.
Well, I wouldn't say that he's the best athlete. I would say
of the two. I'm saying
of the two,
yeah,
100%.
Yeah.
It's not even close. Like I'm in agreement with you. I'd say Usain Bolt by far is the better athlete.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm not trying to diminish Michael Phelps and his accomplishments because truly, I mean, that's phenomenal. And but if you're talking about like the greatest athlete, I mean, I think you need to look at like LeBron James or Deion Sanders or somebody in that realm as opposed to Bo Jackson. You could make an argument for those guys. For me, like if you're talking about athleticism, the straight line running and
stand right there for a second.
Yeah.
With Bo Jackson and Deion Sanders, having hit at the major league level for 15 years, how incredible is it that those two guys could play another professional sport, come in with little practice, and jump right in and hit?
Yeah, it's really remarkable because there's no doubt that hitting a baseball is the toughest thing to do in sports. It's the toughest skill that there is. There's not another skill that I think is as difficult as hitting a baseball. And then on top of that, like the requisite athleticism, the speed, the strength, the agility that you have to play in the NFL, and particularly defensive back. That's why I think you could make an argument that Deion may be the greatest athlete that that we've seen, because he was able to play to me, the position that requires the most athleticism of any in all of sports, which is defensive back, cornerback in the NFL.
I agree.
And also, he was able to execute, at least at a acceptable level, the most difficult single skill in all of sports, which is hitting.
Right.
And you've got, to me, like he would be my vote if you said that you can have one vote for greatest athlete of all time. To me, it's Deion.
I may agree with you there. Michael Jordan, just from a total accomplishments perspective, and you add in, might be my choice, but you add in his foray into minor league baseball. Comment a little bit on that. I mean,
Well, he got such a late start. It kind of goes back to what you're talking about. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. I mean, you know, to be an elite hitter, you can't just, like, you know, I think you saw that with Tim Tebow also when he decided to quit football and play baseball. It's like, you can't, being an elite hitter is different from being an elite athlete. And so, you know, the skill acquisition, I think Michael was so far behind on that he just was fighting up. There's no way he was going to catch up. Now, had he purposed himself to be a baseball player from a young age, I think he might have been a Hall of Fame baseball guy, because that just shows how early that you kind of have to get a start to be able to acquire the skills necessary to perform at that level.
Right. And such a willing nervous system. You know, I think when you think of, like, had he played a different sport from a young age, he's probably going to be great at that. It's just a system that's teachable. It comes back to kind of that coachability factor.
Totally. So you look at the guys that, like, I mean, there's been so many guys, like Tony Gwynn was an unbelievable basketball player. Yeah.
Point guard that averaged like 20 points a game.
Yeah, so he could, I mean, there's a lot of guys that you could throw in that discussion. And then there's guys that you could say, well, you know, if they had played baseball or if they had played football instead of basketball or instead of some other sport, they would have been great in that sport. I mean, that's when you're talking about a truly great athlete, as a guy that you could see playing professionally in other sports besides the one that he ended up playing in. So
to bring it back full circle to kind of conditioning and nutrition, in-game nutrition has become something that's really, you know, it's kind of important to team dietitians and that sort of thing now. We've gotten carried away with it, but it seems that you may have been a little bit ahead of your time. Tell me a story about in-game nutrition. I think once at Wrigley Field, you had an encounter with a bleacher creature who maybe fed you something.
Well, it's important that you don't let your blood sugar drop too low when you're trying to compete, because then you kind of feel loopy or whatever. So we had a particularly long inning. It was so long, in fact, that our pitcher had to be removed from the game, and they were going to warm a new pitcher up. And so the entire game I was playing left field at Wrigley. And the whole game, there were these two guys out there in the bleachers, and they were yelling at me about me, you know, like, oh, Berkman, you're fat, mixing a salad, you know, that kind of thing. And I turned around and looked, which was probably a mistake, but they had a box of Twinkies, and they held the box up, and then one guy had a package of them, and he was shaking them. He was like, Berkman, we know you're hungry. You know, we got Twinkies. And seventh inning rolls around, we're making this pitching change, and I thought, you know what, I am kind of hungry. So I turned around, and these guys, they're screaming at me, Berkman, you know, how about a Twinkie? And I was like, yes, throw it down here. And they're like, are you serious? And I was like, yeah, throw it out here. So the guy who took his package of Twinkies and threw it out on the field, and I walked over there and I opened it and I ate it and put the other one in my back pocket. And the fans, you know, they went completely bonkers.
They loved you from that point.
I thought that was the greatest thing they'd ever seen. So I definitely have partaken in in-game nutrition in that way.
Ahead of your time.
You know, as I was eating, I was thinking, I hope they didn't poison this. Like it wasn't some point to get me out of the lineup. But
you were hungry enough to where that didn't
really.
You.
I was willing to take a chance.
Sure.
Yeah. And Twinkies are good.
Yeah. That's hard to argue with. So maybe you could offer some guidance to the modern day nutrition and just nutritionist to team dietitian, and just let them know, if you want this kind of performance,
then Twinkies,
you've got to have this kind of nutrition.
Powered by Twinkies.
I'm sure Cubs fans would appreciate that reference. And then as with nutrition, I understand that you always took conditioning very seriously. And for me, if I'm going to go on a run, for instance, I'm always going to prep myself. I'll probably do a foam roll, get hydrated, maybe some elements, some electrolytes, particularly in this Houston heat. Live near Memorial Park, with which you're familiar, I understand.
Well, yeah, I think you're overthinking it. Like, just one of my philosophies is just keep it simple. All that is great, but that requires a tremendous amount of expenditure of time and energy before you even start to run. And my whole deal is I want to have all of my reserves and all of my energy and focus to be on the actual event, not on the preparation for the event. So I would, as an example, we had a deal at Rice when I was there. Coach Graham took it into his head that a great conditioning test for the team would be to run you mentioned Memorial Park. We're going to run 3 miles around Memorial Park. And you have to do it in 21 minutes or less, which is a 7-minute a mile or better pace, which is pretty good. I mean, you have to move pretty good to get that. And
so Saturday morning, is it?
Well, I don't remember if it was a Saturday or what, but he said this. He was like, we're gonna show up at 7 a.m. to run this thing, and everybody that makes it doesn't have to run it again. And if you don't make it, you're gonna run it every other day at 7 a.m. until you make it. And I was like, this is ridiculous. In fact, I told him, I was like, Coach, I don't remember what the number was, but I actually added it up. I was like, you'd have to hit 380 home runs and then run them out all back to back to back to equal 3 miles. Like, why are we doing this? We're baseball players.
Right.
Shut up, Berkman. This is our conditioning test. So he had told us before we left for the summer that that's what was going to be facing us when we came back. So my roommates, they were in your mode, foam roll. They had been running. They had been preparing for this. They're like,
probably mapped out.
Yeah, they knew what was, and my approach was like, look, would I rather be miserable one day or all the days leading up to try to get ready for this thing? And I was like, I'd rather be miserable just the one day. So the morning of the event dawns, and my roommates had been up for several hours doing what you're talking about. I woke up late after they had already left and wolfed down a bowl of Rice Krispies. Talk about nutrition. You got to make sure you're properly equipped for what you're trying to do. So I ate a bowl of Rice Krispies, jumped in my truck, and sped over to Memorial Park. And I happened to grab that day, the top of the clean or almost clean pile was a royal blue shirt, a royal blue pair of shorts. I grabbed my tennis shoes and couldn't find any socks, so I just put my tennis shoes on with no socks. And I had a royal blue bandana in my truck, which I tied around my head. And as I was driving over there, I was like, I'm going to mess with these guys, and I'm going to call myself the Blue Dart.
The Blue Dart.
And I'm going to basically talk smack, knowing that there's no way I can make this 3-mile run. I hadn't run at all during the summer. So pull up, and it was right at 7 a.m. The team is like lined up, ready to do the race.
Where's Berkman?
I couldn't find a parking space, so I just pulled over in a ditch and jumped out of my truck and ran over to the line. And he was like, Berkman, you're almost late. And I was like, that's all right, Coach. Blue Dart's here. Like, I'm gonna win this thing. I'm talking smack. So he's like, all right, everybody go. So when he said go, I took off on a dead sprint, and I'm calling back over my shoulder like, I'll see you chumps at the finish line. Blue Dart, undefeated, all this stuff. And my plan was, in my mind, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to run around the corner and to where Coach Graham can't see me, and then I'm going to start walking.
Right.
And then, I know one of my roommates is going to make this thing because they've been training for it all summer. And so when I have to run it again 2 days from now, I'm going to just run around the corner. I'm going to have them pick me up in a truck and then drive me all the way around, drop me off. And I'm going to act like I made it. Yeah, like that's how I was.
Record time.
Right, that's how I was going to make it. And so I was like, I'm going to see how long I can keep this pace. I'm just jacking with guys. And I amazingly felt great. And I'm running. And I looked down and I ran the first mile, no kidding, in like 5:20 something.
Wow.
I mean, I had smoked the first mile, and I thought, oh, I can make this. I can do it. And by about the 2-mile mark, it was like the honeymoon was over. All the lactic acid had started to set in, and the gorilla jumped on my back. But at this point, I'm 2/3 of the way done with it.
The myelin couldn't save you at that point.
And I was like, I'm gonna win this thing. Now I'm determined. Like, I'm way out in front. The next closest guy was Mario Ramos, who ended up pitching in the big leagues, but he was about this big around, pitcher.
Right. Cross-country runner.
Yeah, cross-country runner, basically. So finally, with about a quarter of a mile left, he finally caught me, and because I was run walking and he's point crawling, and I'm like, no, I'm not gonna quit. So he caught up to me, and the last quarter mile, I stayed with him. So he and I finished together, won the thing. We ran it in like 18:20,
Wow.
And Coach Graham, as soon as I crossed the line, he was like, "Berkman, you cheated. You cut across the golf course," you know. And as soon as I crossed the finish line, I hit all fours and started puking Rice Krispies everywhere.
Right.
So when he saw that, he was like, "Oh, I guess you didn't cheat." Well, I had to lay in the fetal position at the finish line for like 20 minutes until I finally recovered enough to crawl back to my truck and go back to the apartment. I didn't move for the rest of the day, but the blue dart did prevail, and ended up being Coach Graham the next day at practice. He was like, "That's the kind of effort we need, the kind of effort that Berkman gave." He didn't know that I was planning on cheating him. It was just, by happenstance that I decided to try to, it was like a personal challenge to try to win. So anyway.
The legend of the blue dart.
That's right.
It actually preceded you. I'd never heard of Lance Berkman, but I knew who the blue dart was.
See? Yeah, it's famous. In some circles, it's really famous.
Oh man, that's such a good story. Actually, that has been told many times by many eyewitnesses.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It's
if all the people that claim to be there were actually there, our team would have been like 75 strong. So.
Oh man.
Let's take a break.
Let's take a break. All right, so we're back from a brief break just to finish things up here. So I was a huge sports fan as a kid. I'm sure you were too. We've talked about that some. But who was your favorite player growing up? Who was your favorite baseball player when you were a kid?
Don Mattingly. He was a guy that left-handed hitter. Yep. Back in my childhood, which was the mid to late 80s and then on into the early 90s, he was the MVP candidate and may have won an MVP, I think, in 85 or 86, but he was definitely one of the best players in the game, and just respected the way he played and the way he went about his business, and got a chance to meet him after I made it into pro ball. And they always say don't meet your idols, but I can tell you that I had a great experience with Don. He's a wonderful human being and great to be around. Yeah, Donnie Baseball is great guy. Would love to be able to spend some more time with him, but our paths really haven't crossed. But in our brief encounters, I'm glad that he was my favorite player because he's a really good guy.
That's awesome. Yeah, we grew up around the same time, and Don Mattingly, Wade Boggs, Andre Dawson, the Hawk was one of my favorites.
Yep. Always on WGN.
That's
right. Got a lot of those games.
Yeah. Mark McGuire in his very early days. And I'll never forget going to my first big league spring training, compliments of Lance in 2011. Went to the St. Louis Cardinals spring training at Roger Dean Stadium, and walk into the clubhouse, and Lance is talking with Tony La Russa, another legend from that same time period, introduced me. And as we're walking out of the clubhouse, I didn't realize that Mark McGuire was now the Cardinals hitting coach.
Yeah.
And that was kind of an awestruck moment to be able to cross paths with him.
He's a big fella, isn't he?
Big fella.
Golly.
Yeah, he really is. But yeah, I think that's so cool that you get a chance for it to kind of come full circle. And now I'm sure some of your recruits watched you when they were growing up, and to be able to coach and have that.
It's really their parents. Yeah, because the recruits themselves, a lot of them were born, around the time that I was wrapping up my career. Right. So they don't know jack squat about the old Coach Berkman.
Right. That's so funny. Yeah, and just as I try to better myself in my coaching journey, is there anything that, I would like to ask most guests this? Is there anything that you think I maybe could have done a better job of, or
well, Ben, I mean, I
overused?
Tremendously enjoyed our time working together, but I will tell you, I think you need to give the athlete a little more credit, and I'll give you an example. There would be a lot of times where you would say, "Hey, we're going to do pull-ups," and inherent in the name is you pull, right? You pull up. And yet, every time I would get to the bottom, you would say, pull. Like I would forget, you know what I mean? Like you were acting like I'd forget what I was supposed to be doing, and I will admit, sometimes it is helpful, like when you get to the bottom, to know pull. And I'm sitting here like pushing against it. I'm not getting anywhere. So the reminder to pull, I think it can be helpful, but maybe something that you could cut back on. Similarly with push-ups, like when you get to the bottom, you really only have one option. Like you can't do much except push when you get to the bottom of a push-up.
So the push you at the bottom of push-up
is not as helpful as you might have thought it was. And then, a lot of times when we'd be doing our sprint work and you would say, go, 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 go at the beginning of the sprint, it was as though you thought I didn't understand what I was supposed to be doing. Like, oh, we're going to run sprints. And then you say go, and I'm like confused as to what that means. But, the go, 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 go command might be a little bit overused.
I can see that. Yeah, I think that's helpful. Yeah. Thanks, Coach. Uh, no, we had such a good time getting to visit again,
Yeah.
and just talking through one of my favorite clients of all time, and dear friends, and one of my favorite people. So thanks for taking the time to spend with us today, and honored to have you as a first guest on the show.
Well, I am honored to be the first guest on this show, and hopefully there'll be another time or two when I can come back and tell some more stories and
Absolutely.
circle back with you. I'm sure this thing's going to explode, so I'm looking forward to international fame.
Yes.
And glory. So no, thank you for having me again. You know, we didn't say it necessarily at the beginning, but truly one of the reasons I was able to make a comeback, so to speak, after that bad 2010 year was meeting Ben, and it's changed my life in a lot of ways. Was able to win a World Series, which is a highlight for me for sure of my playing career. And then as I get into coaching, I find myself coaching guys in the way that you coached me, and especially in the strength conditioning realm. So got a lot to offer, and I would highly recommend anybody that is interested in performing at their peak level, look up Ben and Fairchild Sports Performance, see what he's doing, because it's the best.
Thank you, Lance.
That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.